Welcome to the Nightmare Vault. Before we start, drop a hello in the comments. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Let's begin. I haven't told my girlfriend this, not my family nor the police, definitely not the police. So I'm 29. I work in IT consulting in Birmingham. There's nothing special about my life really. I've got a decent flat, been with my girlfriend for 3 years, and I hang out with the same group of friends I've known since uni. My job is mostly remote troubleshooting for corporate clients, which is basically me spending all day on video calls telling executives how to restart their computers or find files they've misplaced. My friend Mark and I go way back to our first year at uni, where we both did computer science. He was always the one taking risks. While I went into boring corporate IT, he got into cybersecurity and now does penetration testing for a living. Basically, companies pay him to hack into their systems to find weaknesses. We don't work in the same field anymore, but we still game online most weeks and grab a pint when we can. So this Friday night in March, we're doing our usual thing, playing some online games. My girlfriend was away at her sister's for the weekend. Around 10, after a few rounds, Mark says he wants to show me something he found during a job. Nothing unusual there. He's always sending me weird coding stuff or security things he discovers. We switched to screen sharing on our voice chat. His desktop was a mess as usual, about 50 windows open because he never closes anything. He dug through some folders, then got all serious, asking if I was ready to see something intense. I laughed it off, thinking he was being dramatic about some security hole he'd found or something. That was just Mark's way, always making tech discoveries sound like he'd found buried treasure. He opened up this weird browser I didn't recognize, not Chrome or anything normal, something with a bare-bones interface. When I asked about it, he said it was for accessing the dark web, all configured with security stuff and anonymizing features. That got my attention. I mean, I knew what the dark web was, that hidden part of the internet, where all the dodgy stuff happens, but I'd never had any reason to go there myself. Mark explained that during a job, he'd found some login credentials that led him into some pretty dark places online. He'd found what he called mind-blowing, some live streaming site that showed reality without filters. The way he described it, I thought maybe it was just some extreme version of reality TV or banned content too graphic for YouTube or something. Looking back, I should have noticed something was off. Mark's usually pretty chilled, but that night he had this weird energy, like nervous, but excited at the same time. Not like him at all. But I didn't think much of it then, just went along, because I was curious what had got him so worked up. He went through a bunch of login screens and eventually got to this site. Black background, red text, very basic looking. It was set up kind of like Netflix, with thumbnails for different channels. Most were dark or just showing shadows, but one was active with what looked like a brightly lit room. Mark clicked on it and it filled the screen. What I saw was what looked like a basement or warehouse. Concrete walls, super bright, harsh lighting. In the middle was a bloke tied to a chair, blindfolded. Standing next to him was someone in dark clothes, wearing one of those plain white masks you see in horror films. My first thought was, this is some low-budget horror film or haunted house live stream. It looks staged, you know? Too perfect, like a film set. I made some joke about how bad the production was, but Mark didn't laugh. Instead, he pointed to a chat window where people with weird usernames were posting comments and what looked like requests for things to happen. Mark then told me, dead serious, that this was called a red room, a live stream of actual torture or violence that people pay to watch and sometimes even control. I told him to shut it off, that it had to be fake, that nobody would be stupid enough to broadcast themselves committing actual crimes. He insisted it was real, that he'd checked with some security contacts, and that this stream was apparently one of the trusted ones in these circles. The fact he used the word trusted for something like this made me feel sick. I was about to disconnect when the person in the mask walked over to the guy in the chair and took off his blindfold. The bloke blinked in the bright light, looking around, and when I saw his face clearly, I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I knew him. Not well, he wasn't a mate or family or anything, but definitely someone from my everyday life. He was the barista at the coffee shop near my office. I stopped there almost every morning. We weren't friends exactly, but we had that familiar thing you get with someone you see regularly. He always remembered my order, sometimes recommended new coffees. We'd chat about the weather or whatever. He'd mentioned once that he was working to save up for uni. And now here he was, tied up in what Mark was saying was a red room. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost on our video call, because Mark asked if I was okay. Without thinking, I blurted out that I knew the guy on screen. Mark laughed at first, thinking I was joking. When I insisted, telling him exactly who it was and how I knew him, Mark's face went completely white. He suddenly seemed to realize what this meant. Either this was some crazy coincidence, or somehow the people running this stream were in the same city as me. Then things got really freaky. The chat on the stream suddenly went crazy. People started posting messages asking if someone had recognized the subject, if there had been a security breach. I realized with absolute horror that our conversation was somehow being monitored. Either Mark's computer was compromised, or the streaming site had access to our voice chat. Mark started frantically trying to close the browser, but it froze up. Messages kept appearing in the chat, now directly addressing the viewer who knows the subject. One user with an admin tag posted coordinates that were scarily close to my neighborhood. Mark ended the screen share and hung up on our call. I tried calling straight back, but he didn't answer. A few minutes later, I got a text from him telling me to turn off all my devices, not to contact him again, and to stay somewhere else that night. He said his system had been compromised, and whoever was running the stream now had info on both of us. I stayed at a hotel that night, paid cash, kept checking the news for anything about kidnappings or murders. Next morning, I went to the coffee shop, heart pounding the whole time. The barista was there, completely normal, serving customers like nothing had happened. He greeted me like usual, same as any other day. For a minute, I felt this massive relief. Maybe it was all fake, a prank, a look-alike, something like that. I actually managed to convince myself of this until I got back to my flat that afternoon and found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a photo, a screenshot from our video call, showing my face exactly at the moment when I recognized the barista. On the back, written in red ink, "Viewers become participants eventually." I haven't heard from Mark since. His social media disappeared a few days later. Our mutual friends told me he suddenly quit his job and moved abroad. The barista worked at the coffee shop for about another week, then just vanished. According to his co-workers, he didn't give notice or anything, just stopped showing up. I've moved flats, changed my phone number, set up new online accounts, got security cameras, take different routes to work every day, but I never feel safe. Every night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I keep seeing that moment when I recognized him, and I can't stop thinking about how these people know exactly who I am and where to find me. The worst part is not knowing. Was this whole thing set up? Did they deliberately pick someone from my daily life, knowing I'd be watching? Or was it just some horrible coincidence that of all the people they could have grabbed, they took someone I would recognize? I honestly don't know which is worse, that I randomly stumbled across this nightmare, or that I was the target all along. "6 months ago, I considered myself pretty tech-savvy. I've built my own computers since I was 15, worked in IT for a few years before switching to graphic design, and thought I knew the difference between the regular web and the darker corners of the internet. Turns out I had no idea how quickly you can stumble into something terrible when you're not paying attention. I'm 32, recently divorced, and was going through that classic post-breakup phase where loneliness hits hardest late at night. My ex and I had been together since university, nearly 10 years, before she decided we'd grown in different directions and moved out last autumn. After the split, I threw myself into freelance design work during the day, but the evenings stretched endlessly in my too quiet flat in Bristol. I'd never really dated as an adult, having met my ex in a philosophy seminar when I was 21, and the whole online dating scene felt overwhelming. One Friday night in February, after a couple of beers and a particularly depressing attempt at cooking for one, I found myself browsing dating sites, not the mainstream apps everyone uses, but increasingly obscure ones I discovered through Reddit threads and tech forums. I told myself I was just researching the user experience as a designer, but really, I was lonely and curious about how people connected online now. Around 1 a.m., after falling down a rabbit hole of increasingly dubious dating platforms, I clicked a link that promised unfiltered video connections with no corporate censorship. The site looked professionally designed but had an edgy aesthetic, dark background, red accents, minimalist interface. It required no sign-up, just an agreement to terms of service I admittedly didn't read, and access to my webcam, which I allowed without much thought. In my slightly buzzed state, the lack of registration seemed convenient rather than suspicious. The site's landing page displayed thumbnails of what appeared to be webcam feeds, mostly women in dimly lit bedrooms, some wearing lingerie, others in casual clothes. It resembled any number of cam sites that exist in that grey area between dating and adult content. I remember thinking it was probably one of those pay-to-chat services and was about to close the tab when a notification popped up. User Diamond Girl 92 has invited you to a private room. The thumbnail showed a woman with dark hair, face partially obscured by shadows, but smiling in what looked like a bedroom. Something about the spontaneous invitation appealed to my ego. The idea that someone had chosen to connect with me specifically. I clicked accept without hesitation. The video feed that opened was grainy and underlit, showing a woman sitting on what appeared to be a bed with dark sheets. The room behind her was sparsely decorated, just some plain walls and what looked like a closed door. She waved at the camera and typed something in a chat box that appeared beside the video. "Hi there, thanks for joining. Can you hear me?" I typed back that I could, and she explained her microphone was broken, so she'd communicate by text, while I could use my microphone if I wanted. This seemed reasonable enough. Plenty of legitimate users have technical issues. She asked basic getting-to-know-you questions. My name, I gave a fake one. Where I was from, I just said UK. What I did for work, I answered vaguely, still maintaining that cautious online anonymity, but feeling increasingly comfortable as the conversation progressed. After about 15 minutes of this seemingly innocent chat, her messages took a flirtatious turn. She suggested we could have some fun and asked if I'd like to see more of her. Again, this seemed like the typical progression on sites like this, usually leading to requests for payment or registration. I was curious how the scam would play out, so I went along with it, typing that I was interested. What happened next was the first real warning sign, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. Instead of the expected request for payment, she asked me to verify I wasn't a cop or scammer by clicking a verification link. The link opened what appeared to be a standard verification page asking for my IP to be checked against a database of known law enforcement IPs. This should have immediately set off alarm bells. No legitimate site would need such verification, but my judgment was impaired by alcohol and the late hour. I clicked the link without thinking, and a loading bar appeared, supposedly scanning my connection. After a moment, a green checkmark appeared, with verification successful, and I was returned to the chat. Looking back, I realized this was almost certainly installing some kind of tracking software or malware on my system, though I didn't know it then. The woman seemed pleased with the verification and began to undress slowly. The video quality remained poor, which she apologized for via text, explaining she had bandwidth issues. As she removed her top, I noticed something odd, what looked like faint marks or bruises on her shoulders and arms. I typed asking if she was okay, and she quickly responded that she had sensitive skin and bruised easily. Something felt off about the interaction, but I couldn't quite place what. The video occasionally stuttered or froze, and sometimes her movements didn't quite sync with her responses in the chat. I began to wonder if I was watching pre-recorded footage being manipulated by whoever was typing to me. About 30 minutes into the date, the tone shifted dramatically. The woman looked over her shoulder suddenly, as if hearing something off camera. Her expression changed from flirtatious to what appeared to be genuine fear. The chat box pinged with a new message. Special request show about to begin. Premium viewers are bidding. Current high bid, 0.35 Bitcoin. I was confused, wondering if this was part of some roleplay scenario. The camera angle shifted abruptly, widening to show more of the room. What I had assumed was a bedroom now looked more institutional. The bed, more like an examination table. The walls bare concrete rather than painted. A door opened in the background, and a figure in dark clothing entered the frame. With sickening clarity, I realized what I had stumbled into. This wasn't a dating site or even a standard cam site. It was what's known in dark web terminology as a red room, where viewers pay to watch actual harm being inflicted on non-consenting individuals. The verification I had completed wasn't checking if I was law enforcement. It was validating my connection to a dark web stream, likely through a series of proxies I hadn't noticed. I frantically tried to close the browser, but it wouldn't respond. New messages appeared in rapid succession in the chat box. Usernames I didn't recognize, placing bids alongside horrific requests. The woman on screen was now clearly terrified, no longer maintaining any pretense of a consensual performance. When I tried to force quit the browser, a new window popped up with text that chilled me to the bone. Your IP has been logged. Your webcam is active. Disconnection will be interpreted as hostile intent. Payment of 2.0 Bitcoin required for secure disconnection. I realized with horror that my own webcam light was on, had been this entire time, and whoever was running this stream could see me, had been watching me watch them. The verification process had likely given them access to my system, possibly recording everything. In a panic, I physically unplugged my laptop from the wall, not even bothering with a proper shutdown. I sat in my dark living room, heart pounding, wondering if what I'd seen was really happening, if someone was really being hurt while people watched and paid for the privilege, if I had just witnessed the beginning of something unspeakable. After a few minutes of absolute terror, I plugged the laptop back in and booted up in safe mode, running every security and antivirus program I had. They detected multiple intrusions, keyloggers, remote access tools, webcam hijacking software. I wiped the hard drive completely and reinstalled the operating system, then spent the rest of the night researching what had happened, using an old tablet connected to my neighbor's Wi-Fi rather than my own network. What I discovered was truly terrifying. The site I had accessed was likely a front end for a dark web operation, designed to appear as a normal dating site on the surface web, but actually serving as a gateway to illegal live streams. The verification process had routed my connection through Tor nodes without my knowledge, connecting me to a hidden service while simultaneously compromising my system security. I spent the next week in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every notification on my phone, every knock at the door. I changed all my passwords, got a new IP address, even considered moving flats. I debated going to the police but feared implicating myself in something I'd accidentally accessed. What if they didn't believe I had stumbled into it unknowingly? What if the malware had downloaded illegal content to my now wiped hard drive? 3 weeks after the incident, I received an email to an account connected to my real name, an account I hadn't used during the interaction on the site. The message contained only a still image from my webcam showing my face as I watched the stream, my expression changing from interest to horror as I realized what was happening. Below the image was a Bitcoin wallet address and the words, "For your privacy." I never paid, never responded. Instead, I created new email accounts, changed my phone number, deleted all social media, and started using advanced security measures like VPNs and Tails OS for all my browsing. I even grew a beard and changed my hairstyle, irrationally afraid that my image might be circulating in places I couldn't access or control. It's been 6 months now. Sometimes I convince myself it wasn't real, that it was an elaborate scam designed to extort money through fear rather than an actual crime being committed. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I remember the woman's expression changing from performed seduction to genuine terror, and I know what I saw was real. The most disturbing part isn't the extortion attempt or even the violation of my privacy. It's the knowledge that these hidden corners of the internet exist where people pay to watch actual suffering, and how terrifyingly easy it was for me, a relatively knowledgeable internet user, to stumble into one without even realizing where I was. The line between the everyday internet and its darkest depths is thinner than most people realize, and sometimes all it takes is a single careless click to cross it. I still use dating apps now, carefully vetted mainstream ones only. But every time I see a webcam icon or a verification request, my heart races, and I remember that night. And sometimes, when my webcam light illuminates unexpectedly during a system update or video call, I can't help but cover it immediately, wondering who might be watching from the other side. I want to share something that happened to me about 6 months ago. I've been debating whether to tell anyone, but after seeing a similar underground cinema club being advertised in another city, I feel obligated to warn people about what might be happening behind those unmarked doors. This experience fundamentally changed how I view artistic boundaries and made me question the nature of entertainment in ways I never imagined possible. For context, I work as a film studies lecturer at a small university in Leeds. My specialization is in extreme cinema, films that push boundaries of taste, morality, and acceptability. I've spent years analyzing how filmmakers create authentic-looking violence, from Hitchcock's chocolate syrup blood in Psycho to modern digital effects that can make almost anything appear real. This academic interest occasionally leads me down unusual paths, including studies of banned films and censorship history. Last January, one of my postgrad students mentioned an exclusive film club operating in an abandoned warehouse district. According to him, they screened controversial works that couldn't be shown in mainstream venues, experimental films, banned international releases, and underground productions that circulated primarily on the dark web. As someone who regularly monitored certain dark web forums for my research on film censorship, I was immediately intrigued. These spaces often discuss fringe productions that existed in legal grey areas, and I'd written several academic papers on how the dark web had become a distribution channel for extreme cinema that couldn't find conventional outlets. My student provided me with a link to a tour site that served as the club's digital front door. The site itself was minimalist but professional. Black background, white text, no images except a stylized eye logo. It described an immersive viewing experience for discerning audiences and promised performances that transcend the boundaries between cinema and reality. To receive an invitation, you had to complete a questionnaire that tested your knowledge of extreme cinema history and submit the cryptocurrency equivalent of £200 as a membership contribution. Academic curiosity got the better of me, and I justified the expense as research for an upcoming paper on underground distribution networks. 3 days after submitting my application, I received an encrypted email containing an address, date, and time, along with instructions to arrive alone and bring no recording devices. The location was in an industrial area outside the city center, the kind of place that had once housed textile factories, but now contained a mixture of art studios, rehearsal spaces, and abandoned buildings awaiting redevelopment. I arrived on a particularly cold Friday evening, following directions to what appeared to be a disused printing facility. The entrance was unmarked save for a small red light above a metal door, where a man in black checked names against a tablet. After confirming my identity and running a handheld scanner over me to check for recording devices, he ushered me into a dimly lit corridor that sloped downward into the building's basement levels. The screening room itself was surprisingly sophisticated. About 50 black leather seats arranged in a semicircle faced a proper cinema screen. The walls were covered in sound-absorbing material, and professional-looking lighting rigs hung from the ceiling. Perhaps 30 people were already seated, most middle-aged or older, predominantly male, all dressed well. Not the crowd of edgy students or counterculture types I had expected. They had the quiet confidence of the genuinely wealthy, the kind of people who collect rare art rather than those who merely consume it. A woman in a tailored black suit distributed what appeared to be program notes, expensive paper, minimalist design, containing only titles and running times, no directors or cast information. The evening would consist of 4 short films collectively titled Veracity, each approximately 20 minutes long. The notes explained these were part of an ongoing series exploring the ultimate authenticity in performance. The lights dimmed, and the first film began without introduction. The production quality was immediately striking. This wasn't the shaky camera amateur work I'd expected from an underground screening. The cinematography was precise, the lighting meticulous, the sound design immersive. The content depicted what appeared to be an interrogation scenario. A person bound to a chair in a concrete room, being systematically tormented by an unseen questioner. What stood out was the performers' reactions. Their fear seemed unnervingly genuine, their pain responses physiologically accurate in ways that even the best actors typically can't replicate. I remember thinking how impressive the performance was, how the actor captured the subtle progression from defiance to terror to resignation. I noted technical details, how the camera never cut away during the most extreme moments, how the sound captured every labored breath and whimper with perfect clarity. As an academic who had studied cinematic violence for years, I appreciated the technical achievement while remaining emotionally detached. The second film featured a different setting, a sterile white room with medical equipment, but similar themes of confinement and suffering. By the third film, however, something began to feel deeply wrong. The consistency of the performances across different scenarios, the absolute commitment of the subjects to their roles, the complete absence of any cinematic relief or distancing techniques. It all began to suggest something beyond mere acting. I glanced around at the audience, expecting to see others sharing my growing discomfort. Instead, I observed people watching with intense concentration, some taking notes, others occasionally nodding in apparent appreciation. A few were using tablets, seemingly adjusting settings or parameters while watching. One man near me was recording detailed timestamps alongside written observations. The fourth and final film removed any doubt about what I was witnessing. It began like the others, but progressed to a conclusion that could not possibly be simulated. No special effect, no matter how convincing, could replicate what I saw. No professional actor would or could endure such an experience. No ethical filmmaker would create such content. This wasn't extreme cinema pushing boundaries. It was actual violence being presented as art. I felt physically ill, my academic detachment shattered by the inescapable realization that I had been watching real people suffering and dying, not performances. The audience's appreciative murmurs around me took on a horrifying new context. These weren't film enthusiasts admiring technical achievements. They were connoisseurs of actual human suffering. As the lights came up, I struggled to maintain composure, to appear as though I was simply processing challenging artistic content rather than reeling from evidence of actual crimes. A man in a dark suit approached the front of the room and thanked everyone for attending, mentioning that feedback interfaces were available in the adjoining room for those who wished to contribute to future productions. I followed the crowd, desperate to maintain my cover while looking for an exit. The adjoining space resembled a gallery with tablets mounted on pedestals. Attendees were providing detailed feedback on the performances they had just witnessed, and more disturbingly, suggestions for future productions. Some appeared to be bidding on specific scenarios they wanted to see realized. On one screen, I glimpsed what appeared to be a selection interface for performer characteristics, age ranges, physical attributes, even personality types described as resistant, compliant, or volatile. My horror deepened when I noticed a section of the room separated by a glass partition. Behind it, technical staff worked at computers displaying what appeared to be dark web interfaces. One screen showed a chat where users were discussing what they had just watched, alongside cryptocurrency transaction records. Another displayed a global map with viewership statistics. This wasn't just a local screening. It was being streamed to paying viewers internationally, with this select audience serving as a live focus group for future content. I needed to leave immediately, but the exit was monitored by security. I forced myself to approach one of the feedback stations, pretending to input responses while desperately trying to appear unaffected. The tablet asked detailed questions about which elements of the performances I found most compelling, which physical reactions seemed most authentic, and how future productions could be enhanced. After approximately 10 minutes of this charade, I casually made my way toward what appeared to be a bathroom, then slipped down a service corridor and eventually found an emergency exit. The alarm that sounded when I pushed through the door was almost a relief, providing cover for my escape into the cold night air. I spent the next week in a state of moral crisis. I knew I should report what I had witnessed to the police, but several factors gave me pause. I had no evidence beyond my testimony. I had willingly paid to attend. I had accessed the dark web to find the screening. Most significantly, I feared that the organization behind this operation had recorded everyone who attended, including me, creating a mutual assured destruction scenario where reporting them would implicate myself as a knowing viewer. When I finally worked up the courage to make an anonymous report, I discovered the building had been completely vacated, professionally cleaned, and put up for lease 3 days after the screening. The tour site had disappeared, the email address was defunct, and I had no names, just faces I might not even recognize in daylight. 2 months later, I received an unlocked envelope containing a USB drive. Against my better judgment, I checked it on a secure computer. It contained only 2 items: a high-resolution still image of me sitting in the audience, looking distressed during the final film, and a text file with a list of my personal details: home address, university office number, parents' names and addresses, and my regular jogging route through the park. Below this information was a simple message: your feedback was noted. Your discretion is appreciated. A new screening series begins soon. I've since moved cities and changed jobs. I no longer research extreme cinema and have abandoned my academic interest in the dark web. But I remain haunted by the knowledge that somewhere these productions continue, with audiences of seemingly respectable people gathering to watch actual atrocities under the guise of exclusive art. Most disturbing of all is how quickly I recognized the technical quality of what I was seeing before recognizing its reality, how my academic training to analyze fictional violence initially blinded me to actual violence presented in the same context. It makes me wonder how thin the line really is between simulated and real horror, and how easily that line can be crossed when something is framed as art or entertainment. Last week, I saw a poster for an exclusive underground cinema experience in Birmingham with the same stylized eye logo. I tore it down, but I know it's futile. These screenings will continue as long as there are people willing to pay to watch. People who tell themselves they're appreciating extreme art rather than participating in actual atrocity. And somewhere in that audience might be another academic, another film enthusiast, another person who doesn't realize what they're really watching until it's too late. I want to share something that happened to me about 4 months ago. I've been debating whether to tell anyone, but after seeing a news story last week about a similar app being shut down, I feel like I need to get this off my chest. Maybe it will help someone else avoid making the same mistake I did. I work as a night security guard at a self-storage facility on the outskirts of Glasgow. It's a solitary job, 12-hour shifts, 5 nights a week, mostly spent doing hourly patrols and watching CCTV feeds of empty corridors. The place is practically deserted after 9 p.m., which leaves me with a lot of downtime. I'm 36, divorced for 3 years now, with no kids and not much of a social life to speak of. My background isn't particularly interesting. Left school at 17, bounced between retail jobs and warehouse work before getting my security license 6 years ago. To combat the boredom of night shifts, I've developed a fairly unhealthy relationship with my phone. Social media, YouTube, mobile games, anything to make the hours pass. I've always been drawn to the more unusual corners of the internet, not necessarily illegal stuff, but definitely content that pushes boundaries. True crime podcasts, footage of real accidents, forums discussing unsolved mysteries. I suppose I was desensitized to a certain extent, which might explain my initial reaction to what I eventually discovered. It started with a recommendation from another guard at a different site. We occasionally text during night shifts to stay awake, and he mentioned an app called Netherstream that featured intense reality content you couldn't find on mainstream platforms. According to him, it operated through a modified APK file rather than official app stores, which immediately suggested it contained content that wouldn't pass content moderation standards. Out of curiosity and desperate for something new to pass the time, I downloaded the APK to a cheap burner phone I keep as a backup. I've always been cautious about cybersecurity, something I picked up from my brief stint in IT support before security work, and using a separate device for questionable downloads seemed prudent. The app installed without issues, presenting a minimalist black interface with red text, reminiscent of old-school hacker aesthetics. The content initially seemed like standard shock material, extreme stunts gone wrong, street fights from around the world, graphic medical procedures. Nothing worse than what you might find on certain subreddits, just aggregated in one place. The app had a simple upvote arch downvote system and a chat function where users commented in real time. The community seemed to revel in the extreme nature of the content, challenging each other to find more shocking material. After about a week of occasional browsing, I noticed a section called Live Events that was locked behind a verification process. The app claimed this was to ensure users were genuine enthusiasts and not trolls or authorities. The verification required uploading a photo of my face illuminated by the screen, supposedly to confirm I was a real person and not using automated software. In retrospect, providing my image to an already suspicious app was incredibly stupid, but late-night boredom and curiosity overcame my better judgment. Once verified, the live events section opened up, revealing a schedule of upcoming streams with cryptic titles like Consequence 17 and Volunteer Scenario. Most were scheduled for late-night hours in various time zones. A notification system allowed users to be alerted when streams went live. Without giving it much thought, I enabled notifications for an event scheduled during my next shift, titled Audience Directive 23. 2 nights later, while making a cup of tea in the break room at around 3 a.m., my burner phone buzzed with a notification. The scheduled event was starting. I returned to my desk, propped the phone against my monitor, and tapped the notification. The stream loaded, showing what appeared to be a basement or warehouse space. The lighting was dim but professional, clearly set up with care rather than hastily arranged. In the center was a person bound to a chair, wearing plain clothes and with a black hood covering their head. My first thought was that this was an elaborate prank or staged performance, the type of edgy internet content that simulates extreme scenarios for shock value. The stream had a view counter showing about 200 viewers, with the chat rapidly filling with messages. To the right of the video was an interface with the heading Directive Options and a series of buttons labeled with various actions. A text overlay explained the concept. Viewers would vote on what happened next, with voting periods lasting 60 seconds. The highest voted action would be carried out, followed by another round of voting. It resembled a dark version of those choose-your-own-adventure games, and I initially assumed it was all staged for entertainment, actors playing roles in an interactive horror experience. The first voting options were relatively tame. Remove hood, check pockets, explain rules, administer stimulant. Most votes went to remove hood, and after the countdown ended, a figure wearing a featureless white mask entered the frame and removed the hood from the captive. The revealed face belonged to a man perhaps in his late 20s, with a terrified expression that seemed too genuine to be acting. His eyes darted frantically around the room, and I could see tears streaming down his face. Something about his expression triggered the first real sense of unease in me. Either this person was an exceptional actor, or something truly sinister was unfolding. The chat exploded with messages, some expressing excitement, others discussing the subject's reactions as if analyzing a character in a film. New voting options appeared: question subject, physical assessment, psychological pressure, provide water. I told myself this must be an elaborate performance, like an extreme version of reality television, perhaps filmed in a country with looser regulations. The production value seemed too high for something truly illicit. Yet something about the raw fear in the man's eyes continued to disturb me. When physical assessment won the vote, the masked figure returned with measuring tools and began documenting the subject's height, weight, and various physical characteristics, narrating the findings to the camera in a voice that had been digitally altered to sound inhuman. The clinical nature of this assessment made it increasingly difficult to maintain the fiction that this was merely entertainment. The subject's reactions, flinching at every touch, silently pleading with his eyes, seemed far beyond what even a method actor would produce. Still, I continued watching, telling myself I was just witnessing an elaborate performance. The voting rounds continued, each option becoming progressively more disturbing. When pain threshold test won a round and the masked figure produced what appeared to be genuine implements of torture, the horrible reality became impossible to deny. This wasn't a game or performance. It was an actual person being tormented for the entertainment of anonymous viewers around the world, with those viewers directing the action through their votes. I felt physically ill, but instead of closing the app immediately, I hesitated. A notification appeared on screen. Participation detected. Viewer accountability protocol enabled. A small icon appeared next to my anonymous user ID, indicating I was being tracked as an active viewer. The implication was clear. Simply watching had made me complicit, and the system was now monitoring my engagement. In a moment of panic, I closed the app and turned off the phone. My hands were shaking as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. Had I just watched, and by my continued viewing, tacitly participated in, a genuine crime unfolding in real time? The thought was so disturbing that I spent the next hour trying to convince myself it must have been fake, despite all evidence to the contrary. When I turned the phone back on an hour later, thinking I would delete the app, I found a direct message waiting in the NetherStream inbox. Disconnection during active stream noted. Viewer accountability requires continuous participation once engaged. Your facial verification and IP data have been logged. Stream will resume on this device in 60 seconds. Before I could react, the app reopened itself and the stream resumed. The scene had changed significantly. The subject was still present, but now showed visible signs of the tests that had occurred during my absence. A text overlay announced, "Previous disconnection penalty applied to subject per protocol. Continuous viewing now required or further penalties will be administered." To my horror, a small window appeared in the corner of the screen, showing a feed from my burner phone's front-facing camera. They were watching me watch them. The voting options now included an additional choice: apply disconnection penalty to viewer. Several users in the chat immediately voted for this option, seemingly eager to punish someone who had tried to leave. I was trapped in a terrible dilemma: continue watching something unbearable or disconnect and potentially cause additional suffering through my absence. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I dropped the phone into a mug of tea, shorting out the device completely. The next day, I destroyed what remained of the phone, throwing the pieces into various bins around the city. I convinced myself that without the device, they couldn't track me. For weeks afterward, I jumped at every unexpected noise, convinced that my involvement, however peripheral, had somehow marked me. 3 weeks later, I received a package at my flat, an address I had never provided to the app. Inside was a new phone, identical to my destroyed burner, but with a single modification. The NetherStream app was already installed, and its icon was prominently placed on the home screen. A note accompanied it: "Viewing participation required. Consequence stream number 24, featuring viewer penalty demonstration." I immediately moved flats, changed my phone number, and took leave from work. I've been staying with an old friend in a different city, using cash for all purchases and avoiding anything connected to the internet. But I can't escape the knowledge that somewhere these streams continue, with viewers voting on the fate of real people. Each click and each vote deepening their complicity in something monstrous. The news story I mentioned, the one that prompted me to share this, reported on police shutting down an interactive criminal live streaming operation. They mentioned recovering equipment and voting interface software, but no victims. Sometimes I wonder if the person I saw survived, if any of it was real or an elaborate hoax designed to terrify viewers. but in my darkest moments, when I can't sleep, I remember the look in that man's eyes and know with sickening certainty that what I witnessed was genuine human suffering, packaged as entertainment, with the audience not just watching but directing the horror with each vote cast. I want to tell you about something that happened to me last February. It's pretty messed up, and I haven't really told anyone about it until now. I figured it might be worth sharing, both to get it off my chest and because, well, maybe it could prevent someone else from falling into the same trap I did. It all started when I received an invitation to test out a new VR experience at a place called Neo Sensory in Manchester. What was supposed to be a simple tech preview turned into one of the most disturbing experiences of my life and opened my eyes to a dark reality hiding behind cutting-edge technology. I've always been into tech, especially gaming and VR. I studied computer science at university but dropped out in my final year when my anxiety got too overwhelming. Since then, I've worked various tech support jobs, most recently at a mobile phone shop in Manchester. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept me connected to the industry I loved. In my spare time, I ran a moderately successful gaming blog where I reviewed indie titles and new VR experiences. It wasn't huge, maybe 5,000 monthly readers, but enough that I occasionally received invitations to preview events or beta tests. That's how I ended up at Neosensory last February. Their PR team emailed me about a new VR experience center they were opening in an old industrial building near the Northern Quarter. According to the email, they were pioneering next-generation haptic feedback technology that promised to blur the line between virtual and physical sensation. They were offering free sessions to selected tech enthusiasts in exchange for feedback before their official launch. No obligation to write positively about it, just an honest assessment of the experience. I'd heard vague rumors about Neosensory on some tech forums, whispers about military funding and experimental neural interfaces, but nothing concrete. What caught my attention was a comment on a dark web discussion board I occasionally monitored for my blog, where someone claimed Neosensory had developed technology based on classified research into pain response management. At the time, I dismissed it as the usual conspiracy nonsense that circulates in those spaces. Now, I wish I'd paid more attention. The Neosensory building itself was impressive. A converted textile factory with the original brick exterior, but completely modernized inside. The reception area featured minimalist white furnishings, ambient electronic music, and staff dressed in matching grey uniforms. I remember thinking it felt more like a high-end spa than a gaming center. The receptionist scanned my invitation QR code, had me sign a digital waiver on the tablet without really giving me time to read it, and then directed me to a preparation room. This first room contained what looked like standard VR equipment, headsets, haptic gloves, and the usual motion sensors, but with some modifications I hadn't seen before. Most notably, each set included what they called neural feedback pads that attached to your temples, wrists, and the base of your spine. The staff member explained these would enhance sensory immersion by creating precise neurological feedback loops. It sounded impressive but vague, the kind of technobabble that tech companies often use to make simple concepts sound revolutionary. After a brief orientation, I was led to a private booth, a space about 3 meters square with padded walls and a suspended harness system that allowed free movement while preventing you from hitting anything. The staff member helped me into the full gear, headset, gloves, feedback pads, and a lightweight exosuit that applied pressure to various muscle groups to simulate physical resistance. Once everything was connected and calibrated, they left me alone in the booth. The VR environment loaded up, presenting itself as Consequence Level 1. The virtual space appeared to be a stark white room with various objects on pedestals: a glass of water, a candle, a rose, a block of ice. A floating interface invited me to explore physical consequences in a safe environment. It seemed like a basic haptic demonstration program, designed to showcase the system's ability to simulate different textures and sensations. I began interacting with the virtual objects and immediately noticed the extraordinary fidelity of the sensations. When I touched the virtual ice, my fingertips felt genuinely cold. The candle flame produced actual warmth. The rose petal's texture was impossibly realistic. I tried dozens of haptic systems before, but nothing came close to this level of sensory precision. I remember thinking this technology must have cost millions to develop. After about 10 minutes of these basic interactions, the environment changed. The white room dissolved, replaced by what appeared to be a realistic apartment interior. On a virtual screen on the wall, text appeared explaining that this was Consequence Level 2, where I would experience emotional and physical cause and effect in a realistic environment. The objectives seemed simple: complete everyday tasks, while the system created appropriate sensory feedback. As I moved through the virtual apartment, interacting with objects, I began to notice something odd. Occasionally, when I performed certain actions, dropping a plate, closing a drawer, turning on a tap, I would hear faint sounds that didn't seem to match the virtual environment. Something like muffled gasps or sharp intakes of breath. At first, I assumed it was just part of the ambient sound design. But the sounds occurred inconsistently, only following specific actions. The system guided me through increasingly complex tasks, eventually introducing stress elements like time challenges. During one timed cooking simulation, I accidentally knocked over a virtual pan of boiling water. The haptic feedback delivered a mild sensation of heat to my arm, but more disturbingly, I distinctly heard what sounded like a cry of pain from somewhere outside the simulation. The sound was quickly masked by the program's audio effects, but it left me unsettled. When I completed Level 2, the environment shifted again. Consequence. Level 3 transported me to what appeared to be a sterile laboratory setting. The interface explained this level would explore physical consequence escalation and test my threshold for causal comfort. The objectives became more bizarre. Use various implements on test subjects represented as featureless mannequins. Adjust environmental controls that cause visible discomfort to these figures. Manipulate emotional states through physical stimuli. The disembodied sounds became more frequent and distinct, definitely human reactions corresponding to my actions in the simulation. When I used a virtual scalpel on a mannequin, I heard a stifled scream. When I adjusted temperature controls to extremes, there were sounds of shivering or panting. The haptic feedback to my own body remained mild and manageable, but something about the audio felt increasingly wrong, increasingly real. I tried removing the headset, suddenly uncomfortable with whatever I was participating in, but discovered it wouldn't detach. The neural feedback pads seemed to have formed some kind of temporary bond with my skin. I called out for assistance, but no one came. Instead, the program advanced automatically to Consequence Level 4. The laboratory environment expanded, revealing glass-walled cells containing actual human figures rather than mannequins. Each person wore equipment similar to mine, but with more extensive neural pads covering much of their bodies. With sickening clarity, I realized what was happening. My virtual actions were controlling real physical sensations being delivered to actual people. The haptic feedback I was receiving was merely a fraction of what they were experiencing. An interface appeared, explicitly confirming my suspicions. Direct neural stimulation now linked. Your actions equal their consequences. Premium dark web streaming active. Current viewers, 152. Current Bitcoin revenue, 3.28. I wasn't merely a tester of new VR technology. I was an unwitting torturer providing entertainment for paying viewers on the dark web. The sensation of ice on my fingertips corresponded to freezing pain for someone else. The warmth from the candle translated to burning agony for my involuntary partner. Every interaction I'd found so impressively realistic had caused genuine suffering to someone being held in this facility. In horrified panic, I tried again to remove the equipment, pulling frantically at the headset and gloves. This triggered what the system called a non-compliance protocol, a brief but excruciating electrical shock delivered through the neural pads. A message informed me that removing the equipment prematurely would cause terminal feedback to both myself and my connected subjects. For what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, I was forced to continue participating, trying to minimize the actions that seemed to cause the most severe reactions. Eventually, a countdown timer appeared, indicating the session was nearing completion. When it reached 0, the system began a shutdown sequence, and the equipment finally released its hold on me. As the headset lifted away, I caught a glimpse of multiple screens on the booth's wall that had been hidden before. They showed various angles of rooms containing people connected to equipment similar to mine, their bodies responding to whatever was happening in their corresponding simulations. Some were clearly unconscious, others writhing in obvious distress. One screen displayed what appeared to be a bidding interface with usernames and cryptocurrency amounts. I stumbled out of the booth, dizzy and disoriented, to find the preparation room empty. The reception area was similarly deserted, with no sign of the staff who had greeted me earlier. The building's main door was unlocked, and I fled into the street, gasping for air that didn't reek of sanitizer and fear. I spent that night deliberating whether to contact the police. By morning, I convinced myself I should, but when I returned to the address with 2 officers, we found the building completely empty. No VR equipment, no booths, not even the reception desk. Just an empty industrial space with bare walls and a concrete floor. The officers took my statement but clearly didn't believe me, especially when they couldn't find any record of a company called Neosensory, registered at that address or anywhere in Manchester. 2 weeks later, I received an email from an encrypted address containing only a video file. The footage showed me during my session, my face contorted with fascination and then horror as I gradually realized what I was participating in. Below the video was a message: Level 5 access granted. Premium controller status available. Your unique neural signature has been catalogued. Distance operation now possible. I destroyed my laptop, changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts, and moved to a different city. But I can't escape the knowledge of what I participated in, or the fear that somehow, through that brief neural connection, they still have access to me. Sometimes my fingers tingle unexpectedly, as if holding phantom controllers. Sometimes I feel the ghost of those neural pads against my skin. And sometimes, when I pass someone on the street who winces suddenly or gasps in unexpected pain, I wonder if somewhere, someone is playing a game with real consequences, using the neural signature they harvested from me as their unwitting proxy in the physical world. I need to tell someone about what happened 3 months ago. I've been keeping it to myself, trying to pretend it never occurred. But after seeing a news story yesterday about a missing person who looks eerily similar to someone I saw, I can't stay silent anymore. Maybe by sharing this, I can warn others about how quickly curiosity can turn into complicity. I'm a 29-year-old network security analyst based in Manchester. I've always been fascinated by technology, built my first computer at 12, taught myself coding by 14, and spent my university years exploring the more obscure corners of the internet. This background eventually led to my current job, where I help companies identify and patch vulnerabilities in their systems. The irony of what happened isn't lost on me. Someone who gets paid to protect others from digital threats becoming entangled in one himself. My interest in the dark web began professionally. Understanding how attackers operate means knowing where they gather. So I'd occasionally browse certain forums using security precautions, VPNs, Tor browser, dedicated laptop that never connected to my home network. Nothing illegal, just observational research that sometimes proved useful for work. I'd visit cryptocurrency discussions, hacking forums, marketplaces, always as a silent observer, never participating. On this particular night in April, I was using my old ThinkPad, a battered machine I'd kept specifically for these browsing sessions. It was around 1 a.m., and I was slightly drunk after a night out with colleagues celebrating a successfully completed project. Rather than going straight to bed, I decided to catch up on some security forums I frequented, partly out of professional habit and partly out of that restless curiosity that sometimes takes hold when you're just intoxicated enough to make questionable decisions. I was browsing a relatively benign forum discussing encryption methods when I noticed a thread titled Interactive Security Demo, Vulnerabilities in Real-Time Monitoring Systems. Given my field, it caught my attention immediately. The thread described a demonstration of security flaws in surveillance systems that would allow viewers to better understand how to protect their own networks. There was a link promising a live demonstration, along with assurances that it was educational content hosted through secure channels. I should have been more cautious. Any sober security professional would have recognized the red flags. The thread was new from an account with minimal history. The timing was odd for a legitimate demonstration, and the link structure didn't match standard formatting for the forum. But a combination of alcohol, late-night poor judgment, and professional curiosity led me to click through. The link redirected several times, passing through what I now recognize were multiple proxies and authentication checkpoints. Eventually, it loaded what appeared to be a video feed alongside a command terminal interface. The video showed what looked like a storage room or basement, concrete walls, metal shelving units, harsh fluorescent lighting. In the center was a person seated on a metal chair, their hands apparently secured behind them. Their head was covered with what appeared to be a dark cloth bag. My first thought, embarrassingly, was that this was some kind of role-playing scenario or staged educational demonstration. The command terminal beside the video displayed green text on a black background with the header Admin Demonstration Interface and a prompt reading Enter Command. Below this was a scrolling feed of what appeared to be commands already entered by other viewers. Things like status and check restraints and remove hood. I hovered my cursor over the command line, still not fully comprehending what I was seeing. I typed help, thinking it would display available commands for whatever security demonstration this was supposed to be. The system responded with a list of options, categorized by type: environmental controls, subject management, physical testing, and termination protocols. Each category expanded into specific commands with brief descriptions. It was the clinical nature of these descriptions that first triggered my unease. Apply electrical stimulus to assess subject response thresholds under physical testing. Adjust ambient temperature to evaluate environmental stress factors under environmental controls. The language was detached, technical, but hinted at something deeply disturbing. As I watched, someone else entered a command: remove hood. A moment later, a figure entered the frame, someone wearing dark clothing and a featureless mask that covered their entire head. They approached the seated person and removed the hood, revealing the face of a young man, perhaps in his early 20s. His eyes were wide with unmistakable terror, darting around frantically. His mouth was covered with tape, preventing him from speaking. The horrible reality dawned on me slowly, then all at once. This wasn't a demonstration or role-playing scenario. This was a real person being held against their will, and the command interface was allowing viewers to dictate what happened to them in real time. I had unwittingly access to what dark web researchers call a red room, a live stream of actual violence and torture, but with an interactive element that made viewers active participants rather than passive observers. My stomach lurched. I moved to close the browser immediately, but as my cursor hovered over the X, a new message appeared on screen. User validation required. Command or disconnect penalty will be applied. Below this was a countdown timer starting from 30 seconds and text explaining that disconnection without participation would result in my IP address and identity being flagged in the system. I froze, uncertain whether this was a genuine threat or a bluff to keep viewers engaged. As a security professional, I knew they likely had my IP address already. Despite my VPN, some exploits can reveal a user's true address by forcing connection through alternate channels. The risk that they had deployed such methods seemed high given this sophisticated setup. The countdown ticked to 15 seconds and panic took hold. I told myself I would enter the most innocuous command possible, then properly shut down and secure my system. I scrolled frantically through the command list, looking for anything that wouldn't cause direct harm. Under environmental controls, I found lights 50% and entered it, reasoning that dimming lights couldn't cause physical pain. The lights in the room dimmed immediately. The masked figure turned slightly toward the camera, as if acknowledging the command's execution. A message appeared. Command accepted. User validated. Session extended. I should have closed the browser immediately, but a terrible curiosity kept me watching for a few more moments. Other commands were being entered rapidly now. Users adjusting the room temperature, requesting close-up camera angles, specifying restraint adjustments. Each command was executed methodically by the masked figure, who moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. When someone entered Begin Phase 2 and the masked figure approached a table containing what were clearly implements of torture, I finally snapped out of my horrified trance and closed the browser. My hands shook as I shut down the laptop, removed its battery, and disconnected my router. For the next week, I was consumed by guilt and fear. I couldn't stop thinking about the young man in the chair, about how by entering even an innocuous command, I had validated the system and become complicit in whatever happened after I disconnected. I considered going to the police but was paralyzed by several fears that I wouldn't be believed, that I could be implicated somehow, that the people behind this clearly sophisticated operation might retaliate if they discovered I had reported them. 2 weeks after the incident, I received an email to my personal account, not my work address or anything connected to my research activities. The subject line was Command History, and the body contained only a still image from the video feed showing the room with dimmed lighting, exactly as it had appeared after my command. Below the image was text reading, "Your contribution has been noted. Premium command access available upon request." I changed all my passwords, formatted my devices, moved flats, and even considered changing jobs. For weeks, I jumped at unexpected sounds and avoided using any computer unless absolutely necessary for work. The fear has faded somewhat with time, but never the guilt. By entering that command, even one as seemingly harmless as dimming lights, I became part of whatever happened in that room. I helped validate and perpetuate a system designed to transmute human suffering into entertainment. Yesterday, I saw a news report about missing persons in Greater Manchester. One face looked disturbingly familiar. A young man in his early 20s, last seen 3 months ago. The report mentioned he had a distinctive scar on his left eyebrow, exactly like the person I'd seen on that feed. I've spent the last 24 hours debating what to do, knowing that coming forward now means admitting my involvement, however peripheral. What haunts me most isn't just the clear and present horror of what I witnessed, but the clinical interface that transformed it into something almost mundane. A command line where atrocities become just another function to execute, where real suffering is abstracted into system operations. The dark web isn't just a marketplace for illegal goods or a forum for forbidden information. Its darkest corners transform violence into participation, making complicit anyone who enters even a single command. I don't know if the young man in the news report is the same person I saw. I don't know what happened after I disconnected. But I know that somewhere, that command interface is still running, still accepting inputs from people who may not fully comprehend that every command they enter, even ones that seem inconsequential, makes them active participants in something monstrous. And I know that somewhere in a database, my username is stored alongside the command I entered, permanently linking me to whatever happened in that room with the lights dimmed to 50%. So I've never actually told anyone this story before. Not fully anyway. It's been eating away at me for months, and I guess I need to get it out somehow. Just bear with me if I need to pause sometimes. It all started last November. You know how those dark winter nights in Bristol get? I was in this phase where I'd become weirdly obsessed with exploring the dark web. Nothing too crazy at first. Just curiosity, really. We all hear those stories, right? Urban legends about what's supposedly lurking in those hidden corners of the internet. I just wanted to see for myself. God, I was so naive. I'd spend most nights after work just browsing through these forums and marketplaces, telling myself I was just being an internet anthropologist, or some pretentious rubbish like that. The rain would be hammering against my window, and I'd be hunched over my laptop with this weird blue glow on my face, just scrolling and scrolling. I started recognizing usernames after a while, started following specific threads. You know how it goes. You tell yourself you're just looking, but you're getting pulled deeper with every click. There was this one user, Void Watcher they called themselves, who I'd see moderating a bunch of different forums. Seemed knowledgeable, intelligent. After a few weeks of seeing their comments, I stupidly felt like I knew them, like we had some kind of connection. Looking back now, it's so obvious they were grooming me, dropping these little personal details here and there that made me trust them. Classic manipulation, but I couldn't see it then. This one night, God, I remember the rain was absolutely hammering down. Void Watcher messages me directly, says there's this new streaming site that's pushing boundaries, and offers to send me a private link. I hesitated for maybe 5 seconds. There was this, this little voice saying, maybe this isn't such a good idea. But I'd convinced myself I was being careful, using a VPN, keeping anonymous, just observing, not participating. What was the harm in looking? That question, it just haunts me now, you know. What was the harm in looking? The link just led to this bare bones page with a countdown timer. Nothing else, just white text on black. Stream begins 47:16. I remember thinking it was a bit weird, but also kind of intriguing. Void Watcher messaged again, saying it was an exclusive first viewing of something completely authentic. When I asked what exactly I'd be watching, they just said, real fear, real consequences, no actors, no scripts. I should have just shut everything down right then, should have deleted my browsers, formatted my hard drive, walked away. Instead, and I'm not proud of this, I made a cup of tea, wrapped myself in this old blanket I had, and just waited. convinced myself I could always disconnect if things got too intense. When the stream finally started, it was just nothing. An empty van interior, dark grey carpet on the walls, single overhead light, weird camera angle. Nothing happened for like 10 minutes, and I nearly convinced myself it was some art project or someone's idea of a joke. I was literally about to message a Void Watcher when I saw movement. A door opened. Light flooded in for a second, then slammed shut. Two figures were manhandling this third person who looked completely out of it. There was no sound, which made it even more disturbing. Just this silent struggle as they forced this person into the van and tied them up. My heart was racing. I was sweating. This didn't look fake. The movements were too frantic, too desperate. I should have closed the window, should have reported it. Instead, I just sat there frozen, telling myself it had to be some elaborate roleplay thing, even though deep down I just knew it wasn't. Then the camera angle suddenly changed, getting all jerky and unstable. It took me a minute to understand what I was seeing. They'd attached the camera to the person they grabbed. I was seeing everything from their perspective now. All the panicked movements as they struggled against whatever was holding them. That's when it hit me. It was some kind of collar or harness with a camera mounted on it. They turned this person into nothing but a walking viewpoint. Just an object carrying a camera for people like me to watch through. Text appeared at the bottom indicating viewpoint activation and bidding commencement. A counter showed 19 viewers, then 23, then 31. Another counter was showing what had to be cryptocurrency values just climbing higher and higher. That's when it fully hit me. This wasn't just some illegal content or whatever. This was, God, it's still hard to say it. It was a live stream where people were bidding to control what happened to this person. I was watching someone who'd been reduced to just content. Their terror packaged up for people hiding behind anonymous connections. My hands were just hovering over my keyboard. Should I call the police? But what would I even say? How could I explain without getting myself in trouble? And where was this even happening? Could have been anywhere in the world. The van had nothing distinctive about it. The camera view went wild as they yanked the person to their feet. For just a second, they faced what looked like a mirror in the van, and I caught a glimpse of their face, young, maybe early 20s, with this crude device strapped around their neck. Their eyes, Christ, their eyes were just terror, pure terror. That split second of eye contact, even through all that technology and distance, it just cut through everything. This was real. This was happening right now to a real person. The bidding counter went crazy as they positioned the victim in the middle of the van. I could only see parts of the other people, gloved hands, dark jacket sleeve, lower half of a face behind a mask. I couldn't look away, couldn't move. By watching, I was part of this. My viewership was being counted. Text flashed across the screen announcing the completion of the first auction. Then these instructions appeared, just cold and clinical, detailing what would happen next based on the winning bid. I won't repeat what was written, what they were planning to do, what they wanted us to see through the eyes of someone who knew they were going to die. That's when the feed suddenly went still. The frantic movement stopped. The victim just froze, and the only movement was their rapid breathing causing tiny vibrations in the image. The silence in my flat was absolute. I hadn't even noticed the rain had stopped. In that awful stillness, I finally snapped out of it and slammed my laptop shut. I was shaking all over. Ran to the bathroom and threw up until there was nothing left. Sat on the bathroom floor for I don't know how long, trying to figure out what to do. Call the police. But what evidence did I have? How would I explain how I found that stream? After about an hour, I convinced myself I had to report it, whatever happened to me. I opened my laptop, ready to take screenshots, gather whatever information I could. But the stream was gone. The link went nowhere. My messages with Void Watcher had disappeared, like none of it had ever happened, except for the images burned into my brain and this crushing weight of having watched without doing anything. For weeks afterwards, I jumped at every notification, changed my locks, covered my webcam, spent nights wondering if someone had noted my presence on that stream, if they'd identified me somehow. But nothing happened. No police, no mysterious figures following me. Just life continuing like nothing had changed, when everything had. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw was real or some elaborate hoax. But then I remember those eyes in that brief reflection, that raw fear that no actor could fake. And I know. I haven't been back on the dark web, scrubbed my devices, changed all my habits. But the knowledge is still there, that beneath all our normal internet stuff, there are these places where people become nothing but content, where watching makes you part of it. The scariest part wasn't even what I saw in that van. It was realizing how easily I'd been led there, how quickly curiosity becomes complicity, and knowing that somewhere those streams are still happening. Those vans are still parked somewhere. Those cameras are still being strapped to people who disappear without anyone looking for them in the right places. Because who would know where to look? And who would admit to having seen them there? Sometimes I wake up and for a second, I think I'm wearing that collar, that people are watching through my eyes, waiting to bid. I don't think I'll ever feel truly alone again.